celebrating 9 years of podcast excellence. The King of Podcasts Radio Network proudly presents The Wrestling is Real Podcast, because wrestling needs us.
This is episode 693 of the Wrestling is Real Podcast, and this is King of Podcasts here with you. Thanks for listening and finding the show where you always find it right here, wrestlingisreal.com. Of course, my website is kingofpodcasts.com, where I have a plethora of episodes of other programs that I do, that I host each week. Every Thursday night, I drop the Broadcasters Podcast, which is everything about the media and commentary and all that good stuff. And this week, I'll be talking about Top Gun Maverick and the lead up to that movie and how big a deal it's going to be for the summer box office to get it all started up. So I'll be watching that on Friday night. And who knows, maybe I'll see anything about it next week on the show. And then also my other series called Depraved and Debaucherous. And this week I talked about how guys have decided not to continue dating and all the issues that come from that. Among other things I'll talk about on the show. By the way, that show, I drop mini episodes on Mondays and Fridays on the audio portion. And I also have it where you can catch it over on YouTube. But there's a Wednesday show I'll do that's a longer form show, that's a real-time show in real life. That's the episode I brought on Wednesday night, and you can listen to that. Just look for kingofpodcasts.com, or just look for the show Depraved and Debaucherous. Wherever you find podcasts, you'll find it. And then, of course, this program, which this weekend we'll be doing a post show for AEW's Double or Nothing coming up this weekend. We'll have that to talk about coming up as well. In the meantime, here we are. And one of the things I'm going to bring up right now that I just don't care to talk about, but there's a lot of the gossipy kind of stuff that's going on that a lot of the other my fellow podcast wrestling brethren, you are going to talk about. I mean, just in the last couple of days, okay, Stephanie McMahon taking a leave of absence from the company, and now they're going to bring in somebody to assume some of her duties, so they're going to hire somebody else on board. Well, she's been around for the company for a long time, so for her to go ahead and take a significant break as chief brand officer, I can see where she's doing that. We don't know why, but we hope the best. Everything goes well. We know that Triple H is back in some kind of a full-time form once again in a different role. So there's that, and then everything else comes down to Naomi and Sasha Banks, which we talked about a lot last week, and then also the part this week about a wrestling journalist out there that decided to make comments about Nyla Rose. Transphobic comments. Listen, it's these kind of things I just don't care to talk about. It's just not important to the owners of the program, which is what I like to go and talk about. Like, I like to talk about the wrestling shows themselves and what we're getting out of what was going on. Like this week, I want to talk about AEW Double or Nothing and where the company has gone in 3 years to lead themselves where they are right now, and where things have gone, especially since last year with all the new names they brought on board, the large money free agents they brought in, and where they have made inroads since last year. And we haven't gotten a full, complete year of that whole transition to where Bryan Danielson and CM Punk and Adam Cole and Keith Lee and all these other free agents that came into the space, and where they've gone with things, Malachi Black, Andrade El Idolo, and where they've all landed. So Double or Nothing is going to give us a showcase of a lot of that. They got a pretty stacked card this weekend. We'll talk about that in a moment. But what I want to talk about now is it's this negative stuff that's going on. With Naomi and Sasha Banks, WWE Television decided to continue to keep talking about the fact that Naomi and Sasha left. They relinquished the belts, the tag team titles, and there will be a 4-team tournament to determine a new winner whenever they're going to have that tournament. Regardless of that, it doesn't make a difference to me what happens there. You're talking about two stars that, as we learned also, looks like Sasha and Naomi, their contracts, respectively, are going to be coming up soon. So they decided to go and make a statement here and drop out. One of the things that's being talked about is if Sasha Banks would go over to AEW. I don't think she needs to. And I don't, I'm going to say it like this. and I mean this, with the way that Sasha Banks has been booked, except for the fact that, yeah, it's unfortunately she's lost so many times at WrestleMania, but she's been appearing at WrestleMania. And she's been a multi-time title holder. I just don't think wrestling's in the cards for her after this. Like, I know she's talked about it. We talked about it last week. We know what she said. But when Hollywood's calling, they're knocking on her door. I just think at this point of her career, 30 years old, this could be just the next phase of her life where, wrestling really was something there. She doesn't have to continue to do wrestling. She could just go and move on to Hollywood. And as for Naomi, I don't know. I mean, I don't think Naomi would get picked up by an AEW, because I don't think Naomi would be at a certain. I don't think somebody would pick her up. And then on top of that, I don't know what other companies are out there that would go and look at her. Because if the move is not to AEW, then of course the perception of a Naomi or a Sasha Banks, if AEW passed on them, and then they were left to say, okay, are we going to see them in Impact Wrestling or MLW or NWA? No. The lower independents? No, we're not going to see that. Those two stars, it's WWE or AEW or nothing. That's it. But it's just an extended absence. And I think maybe we're going to see something back where there'll be a humbling experience and Naomi and Sasha Banks, respectively, will come back. But the company's moving along by themselves. They just don't care. They'd rather just move along and do something else and keep things going. That's all that matters to them. And that's all I think about that. Now, the other thing that was an issue of contention, and by the way, if you want to hear what I thought about Naomi and Sasha Banks, just go listen to last week's episode. I talked for 45 minutes about it. Now, as for the thing right now with Ringside News and the comments being made directed towards Tony Khan and other people of AEW involving Nyla Rose. I've been the kind of person that when I heard about Nyla Rose and learning that she was transgendered and being on the roster, I was like, oh. And then what did I think about after that? I didn't. I didn't care. Nyla Rose is a wrestler, and she's been an improved wrestler. And she is one of the wrestlers that is pretty fun to watch on AEW. The Native Beast. I dig the character. I love the addition of Vicky Guerrero with that role. And she kicks ass. She kicks ass, and that's it. So, nothing else. And I think she's being used, just fine. There's a lot of room for other stars around that try to get somewhere else, but AEW's got a very loaded roster. I mean, when you even look at what they have for Dark Elevation and Dark on a regular basis, of who they could be using, and some of the stars they get to go and work on Dark and Dark Elevation, I'm just saying, wow. Sometimes the caliber of talent they have on there is pretty impressive. It's nice to see that you're just not getting some stars that are going to be out there. And right now, they do have some stars that were part of the company from day one that have left. And eventually, there will be some roles that will be switched around, and we'll see changes among who is out there for AEW with Dark and Dark Elevation. Because they did need the upgrade of talent. And that's what they did this past year. So Nyla Rose is one of those stars that made it from the beginning and has improved very well. Even Red Velvet to a point has also improved quite well. And there's a number of stars they have in the women's division that fit in different roles, and they've improved. Like Anna Jay and Ty Conti. When I look at Red Velvet to a point, and you just see other stars they have in the women's division. I don't hear a lot of complaints about that women's division as much as it was. And I honestly am looking forward to Thunder Rosa and Serena Deeb for the women's world title coming up this week. And Jade Cargill and Anna Jay, that should be a good match too. And Jade Cargill, she's impressed. even though still being a little bit green. The addition of the baddies. The women's division is in a good way to me. I actually like where things are right now in that division overall. But the comments about really just ignorance. People can say what they want. But I don't even know what the reason. I really never cared to go and look at the reason as to why the comments had to be made like they were. But obviously somebody was just in a certain mind just to go ahead and just make some incendiary comments that for fans that might agree with what he said or don't, that's going to you're just dropping a powder keg, and there's going to be something that goes with it. I just don't think it's right. It's like, we have better things to talk about. And they're going to bring that point across and say, okay, you don't like somebody because of their sexual persuasion or the fact that they had a surgery and they're whatever. It doesn't make a difference. The rest of society has grown to accept things. And that's the other part, too. There are always going to be things that you don't like that happen, or things that you don't like that other people don't like. Okay? That's just part of life. But everybody wants to get caught up on something, and they want to go ahead and just argue and complain about something just to argue. It's some of the things that other podcasters have to talk about. And other people broadcasting in general, they're going to talk about the shooting in Texas. A tragic event where 18 people, 17 of those children died. But regardless, I think a lot of people out there that are talking about the event are not focusing on the families and the grieving they're going to go through, and realizing to reflect on your own children to make sure that they're safe. And to go to the schools where your children go to make sure that measures are being taken so that what happened in Uvalde, Texas doesn't happen in their school. But then some people just can't help themselves. Let's talk about something else that can be talked about anytime we want. But it only gets talked about here. When a situation that's tragic, let's bring up something else. Sure. But when nothing gets done, and when the conversation leads to nothing, why even bring it up? Yeah, I'm making that comparison. If you have some contention about something, and there's no solution for it, and there's really no solution needed. In the case of, the fact that Nyla Rose has won the women's world title. So? If you don't like it, your problem. And you decide to bring your problem with something into everybody else's grill, everybody else's circle, and make it public. When people don't care, or they don't think it matters, or, it's the fact of you're just being ignorant about things because you only want to care about what you think and how you feel. And so I see people that constantly have that view. They want to just act and feel like they want without any regard to what anybody else thinks. And they don't realize the consequences of what they're going to do by doing that. And then some people also want to get on to conversations about something that it doesn't even matter to them. Like, who asked you to say anything? That's the other part. The who asked you part of this whole thing. When it comes to Nyla Rose and that comment being made by the guy from, Scott Carrier from Ringside News, who asked you to say anything? Who asked for your opinion? Sure, you run a website that you might get some people to get some eyeballs and some clickbait, but who asked you about anything? Why does it matter? And why do people worry about what this guy is saying? Why does it matter? Well, look what he did. As an idiot. Ignorance turns into real stupidity because, look, now the USA Today, which nobody ever knew that was affiliated with Ringside News, well, that affiliation's gone. Probably a drop in readership. Probably a drop in advertising revenue because certain people will not go to the site, and the certain CPMs that might be picked up for ad revenue for people clicking on site on pages on the site. Well, they're going to get hurt now. And I'll Reside News will be synonymous with something bad because one person decided to be the Who Asked You. Decided to open up their mouth, by the way, behind a keyboard on Twitter. And there's a lot of people that do that kind of thing where they can't say stuff in person. Or if people do it in person, it's grandstanding in front of a camera just to make a point. These are the kind of things I don't care to talk about. The palace intrigue of Stephanie McMahon dropping off, I don't care to talk about that either. And when it comes to Naomi and Sasha Banks, what's done is done. They made a decision. We have no other information to back on. WWE made more statements, and Naomi and Sasha Banks have said nothing. And we saw Sasha Banks at some party, I forget, was it EDC in Las Vegas, the Electronic Daisy Festival, or Carnival, what it was? Other than that, we've heard nothing. Nothing from any of their sides. WWE's decided to go with a storyline. Let's talk about a tournament. And they mentioned the storyline that they're no longer there. And they're indefinitely suspended. And that's holding true. And there's nothing else to be said about it. Everybody else that wants to talk just wants to talk about it. I don't care for it. Got better things to do. So that's what was on my mind this week as I'm looking at all this going on. Just things in the world that people just decide to talk just because they want to talk. And social media is such a great platform just to let you open up and say things that nobody cares to hear or cares to read, for that matter. Which is why I appreciate the fact that if I go on social media, I really just use it in such a way that I understand, number one, I'm a public figure. I consider myself a public figure on social media. Am I that big a deal? No, I don't have that big of an ego. But I have 3,000 followers there on Twitter, almost. Well, 2,500 followers. Yeah, 2,500 followers. And then I got, a couple hundred on Instagram, a couple hundred on TikTok, and, 500 likes on, or some are 600 odd, some odd likes on Wrestling is Real on the Facebook page. So I'm not like overly, I don't have some major footprint of like tens of thousands of people following me, and that I need to go make my word smatter and mean something. I don't have that either. I don't worry about that. I don't know. But everybody wants to have their comments. The other thing I want to talk about too, let's lead into the main event of the show tonight. AEW. And the attacks that AEW has to go and take from distraught, disheartened, and bitter and angry WWE loyalist fans. Because they don't like where things go with AEW. And if some of them try to watch, they have such a bias that they have on themselves, they just can't help it. And they got to make sure they say something. That's why, I'll talk about WWE a lot because I know a lot of people talk about it, and that's what they want to hear about. But it is funny where a lot of times, if I talk more about AEW or Impact Wrestling, I get more of an audience that will be a little more instinctive, intuitive, and they'll listen in because we're talking about other wrestling. And that I'd like for those of you to know that this is a wrestling show that does open up to other organizations because I am much a fan. Watching regularly Impact Wrestling, NWA Power and NWA USA, MLW Fusion, and Impact Wrestling. And I'm like watching it regularly. No doubt about it. It's fun like that. So we get to the go home show tonight with AEW Dynamite, starting with the steel cage match. They've done a great job with Wardlow to build him up without any. They had the whole thing with the Powerbomb Symphony, the lack of music, the handcuffs, and Wardlow feels like Goldberg out there now. And he is so over, and he has not had to say too much. But MJF has, in his work, has made a star. And this is what's unfortunate. When I hear the news that MJF is a little bit disgruntled about where things are in the company, he's not happy backstage. Those kind of reports. Because I'm saying to myself, I hope Tony Khan will hold on to this guy, and once the contract comes in, they'll see that there's a good reason to go and hold on to him if they can. Listen, I mean, if MJF wants to command more money and go to WWE, he can. And they'll probably do pretty well by him if they did. Because MJF is just so polarizing. I just hope he gets creative control over what they get to do with him. And what WWE, if they decide to go after him and put a lot of money in front of him and say, okay, we need to do something really good with this guy. Because look what they've done with him in AEW in 3 years. The turn on Cody, Chris Jericho in the inner circle, and the entire mole in the background trying to infiltrate. The CM Punk issues, the whole CM Punk storyline, which was fantastic, and that MJF, I felt like he overshadowed CM Punk throughout most of the entire program. And then we get here to Wardlow. And this is where MJF is being tasked with using his compadre that has been there the entire time, his bodyguard, his heavy, and turning him face and turning him into a star. MJF has quite a quality to not only overshadow his opponents when it comes to working against Cody, working against Chris Jericho and CM Punk. Some pretty legendary names right there. And he did it. And now Wardlow here. And by the way, even Shawn Spears in this particular storyline has been elevated. Because some of the best work he's gotten to do is right here. It's been fantastic. Now we got Shawn Spears and MJF. They're going to be at sorts. The Pinnacle's falling apart. So what is next? Well, I mean, what? The Pinnacle, I guess, is pretty much broken up because it's just Shawn Spears and MJF. But now it looks like MJF's going to lose everybody because he's going to break off from Shawn Spears. And Wardlow has already broken off. And the FDR has gone on and become faces. They're not even really attached to MJF either. And I don't think that's ever been addressed. But that's all been good. So MJF has done tremendous work being part of whatever storylines he's in to do that. So that's great stuff. Then you go to Hangman Page and CM Punk face to face, and Hangman Page taunting, using CM Punk's moves, and really pushing into the storyline. Pretty good back and forth with them leading up to the match they got coming up for the world title. They're in Las Vegas. The pipe bomb incident is referred to. Hangman Adam Page delivers quite a strong and poignant promo going after CM Punk to make sure that he is not overlooking CM Punk. He looks to dominate. And I can see where Punk might not win the match. I feel kind of bad if they decide to put the belt on CM Punk because that would get a lot of headlines if he did after all this time. I hope it doesn't get to that way. That's one thing I would not hope for. And then you have the Anarchy in the Arena match, which they've taken a lot of things to build that up, but now Jericho Appreciation Society going after Conglomerate right now with Eddie Kingston, the Blackpool Combat Club, all that being put together is quite interesting. And the Santana Ortiz, by the way, as well, which I'm wondering what that match is going to look like. It's not going to be blood and guts, but I don't know how they're going to be able to stand out with some of the other matches they have on this card. That's a lot of talent into that match. And I believe that the Jericho Appreciation Society has done very well to build up, especially the 2.0 guys. I feel like those guys have gotten a big advantage of that. And so is Daniel Garcia. I think they definitely have gotten a jump with Jericho here. And that's the Wizard thing is hilarious. With the fireballs, I think it's hilarious seeing this right now. Jericho continues to morph. He can metamorphize. He can change around. He can go like a chameleon, and he can turn into something else. Another character that's just kind of interesting and fascinating. Chris Jericho continues to amaze. And so long into this long, illustrious career, his incredible. But I like what they're doing with that. FDR Rapunzel. FDR, Jim Ross is probably right. They're one of the best tag teams out there. And they've been getting some great matches to work off of. I mean, the last time we saw FDR with the Briscoes, fantastic. Give me those guys all you want. And Roppongi Vice and FTR, Ring of Honor Tag Team titles, hell of a match. And my thing is, too, I'm really surprised on how well the FTRs worked out without Tully Blanchard and how over these guys are. FTR is totally benefited by being in AEW. They are so much better they're so much better off and so much more over than they ever were. Because in FTR, I would imagine they're going to be a big deal when it comes to the Forbidden Door event next month, which we got to worry about that coming up after this event. We'll have 4 weeks to build Forbidden Door, and I know FTR's got to be somewhere in that mix somewhere. And then they put a whole dynamic together with a triple threat match with Swerve, Strickland, Ricky Starks, Jungle Boy. Because of that whole kind of dynamic of all these stars in the mix right now, I think Swerve Strickland has worked really well so far, getting in the matches he's had, especially with the one with Darby Allin a few weeks ago. Jungle Boy, they want to put the focus on him a lot, so the tag team titles have not been really much a focus as of late. And it's nice to see Ricky Starks and now Powerhouse Hobbs in such a good role. To get those guys in the Team Taz role something here to work on. A lot of younger stars here in this role, which is great. And they're all likable. They're all good, solid, massively talented. And if they were over in WWE right now, they would just be underutilized and they would not be used in any way to the level that AEW is giving them right now. And that's very important to notice. The Owen Hart Foundation tournament and what they've done with it has been impressive. I mean, these matches really do mean something. They've put a lot of effort into all the matches they've had so far. Samoa Joe Colorado was fantastic tonight. Dr. Britt Baker, Toni Storm. And Toni Storm getting the work as she wants. She's going to be the star that she was in Australia and in other organizations before she came to WWE. And in some cases, NXT, she was getting to be what she wanted to be. But now Toni Storm's where she wants to be now. It looks like she's in her comfort level. And Dr. Britt Baker, they keep keeping her strong, even though she lost the world title. To keep her strong here going into the finals of the Owen coming up this weekend and where things will go with that. Now, into the matches they have coming up this weekend for Double or Nothing. What a stacked card when you look at it. Buy-in, you got Hook and Danhausen against Tony Nese and Smart Mark Sterling. And that match for me I like because it's the fact that you're not moving Hook up the ladder too much right away because they're not ready to go ahead and put him up to a certain level yet to put in some real fierce competition. But Tony Nese is somewhat formidable, and they're trying to keep both of these guys pretty strong. So to add a little bit of the comedy and a little bit of levity with Mark Sterling and Danhausen, it's kind of cool. It's the levity that the show has. It's a little bit of the comedy that wrestling needs to have a little bit here. Another one of those weird tag teams you put together with Hookhausen, but the crowd wanted it, so you brought it on. Here we go. We haven't said anything about the trios match coming up. That was not featured on Dynamite tonight. House of Black versus Death Triangle. A match we've been waiting for a while, but we had to wait for Phoenix to come back from injury, and now he's all healthy. That match will shine. And I like House of Black in the role here and what they're doing so far. And with Death Triangle, it's different. But it's also been tough for all these guys to be either together or healthy at the same time. Because Pac, because of issues with travel, or Phoenix getting hurt, those are kind of the issues to have, where it's nice to see Death Triangle now fully healthy. And now we can have this storyline with them and House of Black. This program can be something we can extend out and go with that, which would be wonderful. Now, in the matches, I think Hookhausen will win in the buy-in. The trios match, I say House of Black will win over Death Triangle. And the TBS title match, Jade Cargill, I think, will be Anna Jay. I don't think they have anybody set to go ahead and beat up on Jade Cargill. Just depends on who's that opponent they're going to decide to put up there soon enough. Elite versus Delete, Hardys versus the Young Bucks. And I can see where the Hardys win this match, and they'll take it over the Young Bucks. This is a dream match. Like, when you start this night on Double or Nothing night, do you start with that match and let those guys go off and do their thing? I think you do that. You curtain jerk with Hardys and Young Bucks to start off Elite or Delete. Anarchy in the Arena, Jericho Appreciation Society versus the Blackpool Combat Club, Eddie Kingston, Santana Ortiz. That's got to be wild. I will take the faces, the BCC, Kingston, Santana Ortiz, to win over the JAS. For the World Tag Team titles, Triple Threat, Jurassic Express versus Keith Lee and Swerve Strickland versus Team Taz. And I'm going to go on a limb. And because it's a triple threat, I'm going to say Ricky Starks and Powerhouse Hobbs win the World Tag Team titles. I think Jurassic Express drops the belts. That's a match where I see the tag team titles being vulnerable. So I would take that there. I think MJF will beat Wardlow in some fashion. I don't know how it's going to happen, but I feel like MJF is not going to take another loss on pay-per-view. I think he gets the win. But Wardlow somehow will free himself of the contract anyway, and he'll be off and running. I think that's where we go with that. Can't say much with the Owen Hart tournament because we don't know the final participants, so we'll just wait and see what happens at the show. If I look at where things are in the tournament bracket, we can look right now. At the moment, so Adam Cole versus Samoa Joe, we know that definitive. And I'm going to take Adam Cole to win. Samoa Joe's already got the Ring of Honor title. That's where I see things going there. And as for the women's side, so Red Velvet, Ruby Soho, in that match coming up on Rampage, I will take Ruby Soho to win, and I think we'll get Dr. Britt Baker, Ruby Soho. And I think Ruby Soho gets the win over Dr. Britt Baker in the finals. That's where I think things go with that. And then 2 more matches, Thunder Rosa versus Serena Deeb. This should be a hell of a match. It was very technical in some cases because I want to see Serena Deeb put a whole lot of submission moves and a whole lot of different moves onto Thunder Rosa and really make this a mat match. Keep it on the ground. So this, and it'll be a different match also for Thunder Rosa. So it's not too much. It won't be overly, extreme or, brutal like those matches usually are. Because they always have her in matches where it's always going to be like some blood coming out, this and that. It could very well be in this match too. So that's the Women's World title, and I'll think Thunder Rosa will retain the title. And then Hangman Page versus CM Punk. I'm sticking with Hangman Page. I don't think he's in the mix yet. And with CM Punk, he doesn't have to be with a belt. And I think down the line, something goes on where what I'd like to see, I'd like to see a returning Kenny Omega that has to confront CM Punk. And I think Kenny Omega, after this, will return at Double or Nothing. That's what I think is going to be a reveal. I think Kenny Omega will be back from injury, and he comes out during this. I don't know if there's anything else, but that's why I think. That's where I'm coming from with all that. I don't know if it's true or not, but I'll stick with that thought process. Here's a story I'm going to bring up real quick here about masculinity explained by WWE. And this is a story from Vox.com. I don't know. It just popped up here, and I figured, let me go ahead and bring it up. It did come out today as I'm recording the show. So I will give this story from Sharon Mazer a little bit of time, because I'm curious about what she's trying to say. It's one of those things that just kind of catches my attention. Let's see what she's talking about here. So an expert tells how professional wrestling endlessly evolves to reflect changing masculine gender norms. All right. So the thought process is that men are a certain way, and the way we see men in WWE really represents what men are supposed to be, like how they're supposed to look, and just the whole feel of this. Let's see what they're talking about. So there's always been muscle men in our pop culture, but in the past, they were largely assigned to very narrow archetypes, so the Arnold Schwarzeneggers of the world. But now we have people like John Cena that seem just as comfortable playing an anti-heroic superhero with a bad dad as he is playing an overbearing father who's comedically gets super involved in his teen daughter's sex life. So think the movie Blockers, right? So Cena following the likes of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and Dave Bautista first rose to fame as a professional wrestler. And this writer talked about his surprising vulnerability, and that the more over time she noticed, the more the over-the-top shenanigans and violence of the wrestling ring might be key to his appeal. Wrestling has turned his wrestlers' private lives into fodder for his storytelling, creating a kind of a need to authentically and vulnerably perform the self. So Sharon Mazer, who's professor of theater performance at Auckland University of Technology in New Zealand, wrote a book, Professional Wrestling, Sport, and Spectacle, digging into the ways that performance within wrestling has shifted and evolved, as well as the ways that shift has been influenced by evolving ideas and what it means to be a man, and how wrestling has influenced societal notions of masculine performance right back. So she brings up the fact that, has wrestling changed in a way that better prepared them to evolve stars in movies? So she goes into the history of how Hulk Hogan got into the space, that performances have become mobile from the squared circle into the realm of film and television is a movement from a very social presentation of a wrestler's persona into a very individuated, very personal persona devoid of a larger social set of identifications. Now, these guys present themselves almost straight in the sense of basic and unaffected to begin with. They're in basic briefs, maybe a pretty robe here or there, but they're so straight in their presentation as wrestlers. They're just strong guys. There's no exaggeration to let go of. They're regular working guys. They've got muscles, but so do other working guys. So these guys seem to have been brought into the game because of some humanist appeal, for lack of a better word. When he's working, you can see where Dwayne Johnson is. You can see who John Cena is when he's working. You get one generation beyond them, and they're looking much more like a normal person. The least looking like a person right now are Vince McMahon himself and his son Shane. And it's funny because of the archetype of what Vince McMahon likes in his wrestlers. We never look at the part about, they got to have a certain look, but we never talk about the persona and what they bring to the table in terms of their humanity and what kind of dimensions that these stars have behind the scenes. Now, this writer asks the Professor Mazer about the evolution of masculinity as it is, but the shift towards more personal stories in wrestling for the days of Hulk Hogan or whoever feels of peace with something larger in the culture, to me at least. She says that there are competing masculinities, and whatever war is being fought this week or the next, even the war on women's bodies, those wars are being fought about definitions of masculinity at base and whose ideological stance is going to prevail in terms of masculine performance. So, like, WWE shows us masculine guys, men, but in a very basic, simple kind of thing. We're not talking about anything when it comes to what guys might do in guy things. It's just the brute strength of the men that are in there. And if they're babyface or heel, how they are responding, humanizing to the audience, to make them hate them or to make them love them. Now, they go on to also mention that what makes wrestling so fascinating is that it is so representative of and informative to whatever's going on in dominant culture at any given moment. And the thread that runs through is about, one, defining what a real man is and somehow extending that definition to every man, which they do. I mean, you don't question the masculinity or, if a guy is a guy. Because you don't see much of any kind of clouding up or any kind of, warping of anything like that. If you want to know what a guy is supposed to be, you can look at a WWE superstar, a male WWE superstar, and most likely you're going to find a guy that would be deemed a guy in today's society. Now, in the story, they talk about political battles, especially the U.S., but anywhere around the world, are often about what masculinity is. But wrestling and action movies externalize that question in many interesting ways. So how has wrestling evolved with our idea of what being a man is or hasn't it? And so she says to Professor Mazur, what you're observing in these wrestlers turned actors is reflective of the evolving understanding of what a real man is and how a real man is supposed to behave in the real world. They're not exclusive. It's not like you're representing on one side and the reality is on the other. And also is that they're gentle with each other. So when wrestlers greeted each other back in the day in the gym, they would go, hey man, slide 2 fingers on both sides of the other man's wrist and barely touch. I'm trying to visualize that, I guess. Oh, anyway, I always felt in the wrestler's gym, the point of the general greeting that I saw that they were saying to each other, I can hold it back, I'm in control of this, I don't have to hurt you, but if you push me the wrong way, I will pound you into the pavement. Masculinity in the wrestling gym was about having the power, but also the restraint and following the rules. It may be appealing to see these wrestlers turn actors being vulnerable and showing us their feeling selves, but I wonder what is not being seen as a result, and if that's still the more meaningful takeaway from these performances. So that's what they're talking about with this. I can see where they're coming from with it, but it is an interesting story they decided to bring up. I don't know why, but I was actually kind of fascinated by that. Now, the other story I guess we should bring up too, that's been talked about this weekend or this week, which I didn't talk about at the beginning, but it's fine to talk about right now, is the potential thought that there's a brand split going on between Raw and SmackDown. There's a couple of stories that are talking about that right now. Whatever they're going to say is what they're going to say about it. So I'm going to take from Screen Rant and comicbook.com. So the idea is that WWE has been ignoring it entirely. Wrestlers are crossing brands to challenge for championships or continue storylines. So Sami Zayn was over on Raw for a 6-man tag team match to open this week's Raw, along with the Usos to challenge RK Bro. And now the Bloodline being on both shows because of the fact that now the tag team titles and the singles titles for the men, the main singles titles, are all consumed by the Bloodline. So now they're being featured on both shows. Andrew Zarian, the Matman podcast, has said that the brand split will not be ending. The current plan is to have more individuals jump from brand to brand depending on storylines. Brian Alvarez at Wrestling Observer Live said, quote, they haven't officially said anything, but the brand extension is essentially done. Half of the Raw crew is going to be on SmackDown Friday. Cody's going to be there. I think Seth's going to be there. They're going to just do whatever. Well, it doesn't make a difference because they still need for touring schedules. They're going to have a split set of who's going to be on the road. And on Raw and SmackDown for the television shows, they'll have their set stars on separate brands. It doesn't make a difference if they keep it so separate in the first place. Now, Paul Heyman has talked about the brand split, and he says it's a good thing they have one. Quote, there's not enough space for... And he talked about with Ariel Helwani in our interview last year, saying that there's not enough space for new talent to rise if you're going to have both shows dominated by the same personalities. It's a matter of the time it takes for the talent to resonate with an audience, and how much do you have to define that persona and learn who they are, and why I should care about them and why I should pay to see them. And if you have both shows dominated by Roman Reigns, the Usos, the Bloodline, Paul Heyman, Brock Lesnar, Randy Orton, Big E, Becky Lynch, Charlotte, Sasha Banks, Bianca Belair, we now have both shows booked. So that's a good way to kind of put that. Another story, they have the same thing here. Screen Rant brings this up. Mentioned the point that while stars like Reigns and Lesnar have floated between the red and blue brands, that flexibility has been utilized for mid-carders or even upper-level stars who aren't quite on the same level as someone like Reigns. But WWE is not going to make any announcement of the brands, but if it does fizzle out, it'll just fizzle out. But I don't have any problem with it. I don't know why everybody else has a kind of issue with it, and why it would matter if they decided to get rid of the brand split in the first place. It's been on with us for so long. In a way, I feel like we're seeing the same kind of brand split with Rampage and Dynamite when you think about it. It's just not defined. But you can see there's certain stars they definitely like to put over on Rampage as opposed to Dynamite. And it's not like they don't have main eventers that will work on Rampage. It's just that there's certain stars that are going to be there. But it doesn't make much of a difference if anything. It doesn't really matter. Even NWA has their own setup of the brand split as well with Power and USA. Those shows have different stars as well. Like, I never see the junior heavyweight title being defended over on NWA Power. I mean, you might see some interviews here and there from like some Matt, Nick Aldis was on NWA USA, but I'm not going to see I don't expect Matt Cardona to be on NWA USA. Nor do I expect, some stars in NWA USA like, Gags the Gimp and, Sal the Pal. See those guys on Power. I don't expect that either. Brand split doesn't make much of a difference. It's good for the networks to have their own exclusivity on stars that are pretty good draws for their individual shows. And for the touring schedule, I mean, it's a lot of dates to cover. So to have those 300-plus dates that WWE likes to do on a regular basis, or if they want to cover 2 events on the same day like they've done before, like if Royal will do again, that's the need for the brand split. As simple as that. All right, that's all I'm going to go with tonight. Because I have a whole lot to go and say when it comes to Double or Nothing this weekend. Again, catch that right here, WrestlingIsReal.com. Sunday night from Las Vegas, the T-Mobile Arena. We will talk about that coming up this Sunday night after the event right here, WrestlingIsReal.com. I'll have the show up for you shortly after, and you can enjoy. And we're going to leave it there. We're going to come back next week for the Wrestling Is Real podcast because wrestling. Well, actually, we'll be back with another Wrestling Is Real podcast this Sunday night for the post show. Enjoy Double or Nothing because wrestling needs us. Thank you for listening to the Wrestling Is Real podcast. You can find all previous episodes at WrestlingIsReal.com or subscribe to the show on all major podcast outlets, including Apple, Amazon, Google, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Follow the King of Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at King of Podcasts. And search King of Podcasts on YouTube or type youtube.com/JBRASCO951. This has been a presentation of the King of Podcasts Radio Network.